And I am specifically not looking at Twitch because I don't know if I can manage multiple volume inputs. It's a bridge too far.
Well, that's cool.
Is there a module for that?
I don't know, but we just went live, so you just told everyone. Hey everyone, welcome. I managed to find the unmute button this time. It only took 6 weeks, but I finally got it. My name is James Pett. My name is James. I'm your host today, joined by the man in the tie, that way. We have John, and then also right below me we have Microsoft MVP, Ironman Software founder, and etc., Adam Driscoll. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
So, John, before we get, you want the man behind the tie. Tell us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm John Janelle. I'm the Associate Director and Principal IT Architect at Western Washington University. I oversee our data center teams. I do deli updates on PowerShell Lunch, and I am a PowerShell booster and aficionado. I do mostly PowerShell in Skype for Business, which has been passed off to a far more competent engineer than myself. And I'm mostly here to help James and Adam. So that's what I do, and that's what I'm about. So thanks.
Yeah, so John is a regular at the PowerShell Summit, and also Adam, you're also a regular at the Summit as well. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I think I've only missed one summit in my life, but I am a small business owner, so I own Ironman Software. I've been doing that for about 3 years now. I went full time about a year ago. I am an 8-time Microsoft MVP in Cloud and Datacenter. So I was originally a PowerShell MVP, and now that we're Cloud and Datacenter, that's where I fall in. And I kind of live out in the boonies in Idaho, and I really like the outdoors and stuff. So
awesome. Yeah. Well, congratulations on your MVP. And you said 8th.
Yep. 8.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So you started a new thing recently called Module Mondays, right?
Yeah, I did. Yep. So that was just kind of I needed something to do that was like, I don't know, not completely like work related. So I was like, oh man, I made this list of modules that I think is really cool, and I kind of want to like learn more about them. So I started making YouTube videos about kind of diving deep into some of these modules that I kind of knew about and really didn't know the full details of those modules. So I've just been recording a video kind of every week.
That's awesome.
I think I'm up
So
to 5 videos now. So.
Hey Adam, you
great.
might need to bump your mic up a little bit so you're a little quiet. But you and John are coming through the same audio output on my computer, so.
Ah, so Adam, when you introduced yourself, you mentioned that you had been a small business owner and been running Ironman Software. What prompted you to take that jump to go on your own and be a self-made entrepreneur?
I always kind of felt like I was always building stuff in my free time. Here, I'm still trying to figure out how to make my mic louder. One second. Here, I can't. Is that any better?
Sounds a little bit louder to me. I don't. We'll have to wait. We'll have
Yeah,
to wait for the chat to catch up.
Okay. Automatically adjust volume. And also, I have other mics I can try.
it sounds like you're on your way up as far as the level goes. Yeah.
Sounds a little louder.
Uh,
I could also just speak louder.
oh, there we go.
Nice.
That always works too.
All right, a tiny bit better. Oh, well, that's not good. Here, all right. Let me switch.
Other people.
Let me try switching.
Yeah, looks like we're getting good now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Is that different? Or is that
Oh,
worse?
that's way worse.
Way worse? All right.
It's like echoey.
Yeah, that was like my webcam. All right. Okay. No, you're good. All right. Sweet. Okay. What was the question?
So you started Ironman Software and you mentioned
Okay.
it in your introduction, and
Yeah.
that's a big step. So I was kind of curious on how you took it.
So I've always been like kind of entrepreneurial in my free time. Like 9 years ago, I actually started the PowerShell tools for Visual Studio, and that was just a side project. It got lots of like traction. I mean, it's been downloaded millions and millions of times, that kind of thing. It was actually included in Visual Studio for a while. And when that kind of thing happens, you realize like, wow, I could have sold that. But then, it was one of those things where, I wanted to work on my own thing. I was always trying to find time to work on my open source projects and that kind of thing. So then I started PowerShell Pro Tools, and that got some traction. And then I started Universal Dashboard, and that got some traction. And then I got to the point where I was earning enough income where I kind of felt comfortable leaving my full-time job and working on it full-time. So
That's great.
That's impressive. Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. So yeah, it's been about a year since I've been full-time, and it's stressful, but it's still it's fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. I think we got about 20, almost 30 people here watching. Do you want to go ahead and I guess we'll get started? And
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, definitely. Let me share my screen.
all right, there we go. Perfect.
Should be good.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm going to be talking about today is Universal Dashboard version 3. So this is kind of a long time coming. Universal Dashboard 2.0, I think, was released in like August of 2018. So a lot of people have been using Universal Dashboard over the years. I've seen some really impressive things built with Universal Dashboard, but this is going to be about kind of the next evolution of Universal Dashboard and kind of the platform that Universal Dashboard is running on. So Universal Dashboard is kind of it was a PowerShell module. I'll talk a little bit about what it is now. That allows you to kind of build interactive websites with PowerShell. So you can use your PowerShell scripts to build, websites that don't require HTML, JavaScript, or CSS knowledge. You can build interactive websites that can actually take user input, execute scripts, update various components of the website. Show modals or pop-ups or just things on the page. The dashboard pages themselves are dynamic. So based on user input or the identity of the user or data coming in, the pages themselves can actually update based on that data, and just kind of integrating with your PowerShell scripts. You may be collecting data from numerous sources, that kind of thing, and it'll actually update the pages based on that. And it's very flexible. So Universal Dashboard's cross-platform. You can kind of host it wherever you'd like, whether that be IIS, you can run it on Linux. You can host it up in Azure AD or as a Windows service, that kind of thing. Additionally, it has a bunch of like built-in controls as well as custom components that have been built by the Universal Dashboard community that you can include in your Universal Dashboard pages. So where we're kind of going with Universal Dashboard, it's become part of a platform we're calling the or PowerShell Universal. So PowerShell Universal is kind of the ultimate platform for building web-based IT tools. And this kind of culminated because we had Universal Automation, which is another product that we were building out of Ironman Software, and Universal Dashboard, and they were kind of two disparate like products. And we decided to kind of merge that together, and now we have this single platform where all these products live. So we have Universal API, which is available for building REST APIs to call PowerShell scripts. So you're going to accept, HTTP posts and gets and that kind of thing, and return HTTP responses based on that. Universal Automation is for running scripts and kind of controlling access to those scripts, auditing what happened in those scripts, that kind of thing, as well as scheduling those scripts. And then finally, Universal Dashboard, which we're going to be talking about today, for building custom web pages with your PowerShell scripts. So I want to talk a little bit about the history of Universal Dashboard and kind of how we got here. So in September 2017, I actually released the first version of Universal Dashboard, and it was actually released as a feature of PowerShell Pro Tools. So PowerShell Pro Tools being the extension for Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, but then I kind of like shoved Universal Dashboard in there as like a feature of it, and we quickly realized like, okay, this is like something totally different. So then in November 2017, it became its own product, and we released it as a React component or React single page application. So it was a PowerShell module. It came in Community Edition and kind of like a paid edition, that kind of thing. Fast forward to August of 2018, that was the V2 release of Universal Dashboard. That's when we added the real-time interactive web application kind of features where you can actually update the website kind of in real time using a technology called SignalR. So it actually uses WebSockets to communicate with the web page, and you could actually do things very similar to what you could do in like Windows Forms and WPF in terms of clicking a button, having it update a table, or clicking a button and having it populate something, that kind of thing. So V2 was a big release, and it's been around since then, and we've kind of been revving on it. But some of the problems with Universal Dashboard were that it was running inside PowerShell itself, which kind of limited us to the technology we could use. And just kind of the web framework that we built it on was difficult to maintain. So come around to April 2020, Universal Dashboard has now become part of PowerShell Universal. It has support for dashboards built with PowerShell Universal Dashboard V2 and V3, and I'll kind of talk about a little bit about what that means in terms of using multiple dashboard frameworks. So now it's part of this platform, and we hope to release the GA version of V3 in July or August of this year. So we're really come down there. We've had a lot of beta releases where we've just kind of been fixing things because we've made some really big changes. So we just wanted to make sure that we got it right. So we're hoping to do GA that very shortly here. So what's new in UDV3? So I've been talking a little bit about the platform. So it's the universal platform now. It no longer comes as its standalone PowerShell module. We're looking at how to like integrate it into PowerShell a little bit easier so you can actually distribute it as a PowerShell module. But it's going to run as its own standalone like executable. So it doesn't run inside PowerShell itself. That said, your like dashboards and all your dashboard code does run in PowerShell yourself, and I'll show you how that kind of like architecture works in a little bit here. And the reason that we decided to kind of go with the standalone executable is because now we have control over all the dependencies that we were kind of stuck with when we were running in PowerShell. So one of the problems when you're running in PowerShell is, you have to be on a specific .NET version. You have to be tied to the .NET framework and not necessarily .NET Core, which meant we couldn't upgrade a lot of the technology that was used in Universal Dashboard. It also means that you conflict with a lot of the modules that are being loaded into the PowerShell process. So things like VMware or Azure modules would always conflict with Universal Dashboard. Even the VS Code extension started conflicting with Universal Dashboard in more recent updates of the VS Code extension. So that's why we decided, okay, let's be done with this and kind of isolate it and make it a little bit easier for ourselves. it also provides the ability to do multi-dashboards. So you can have a single web server that runs more than one dashboard. This means you can have dashboards that may run a V2 framework and a V3 framework. You have a dashboard that's authenticated versus a dashboard that's not authenticated. So you could have all these different dashboards running under a single web server, and then you kind of decide the routing to those dashboards. And I'll show you what that means in a little bit. One of the huge things for UDV3 is the entirely rebuilt base component library that we're using. So we moved off kind of this previous version of a component library that wasn't built specifically for React. And because Universal Dashboard is a React single page application, we picked Material UI as our starting point for our base component library now. Material UI is built on React. I'll kind of show you some examples of some of their controls. It has a similar look and feel as the previous version of Universal Dashboard, but it's way easier to maintain on our end. They have additional control support. It's way more actively maintained. And it has a lot larger user base than the previous library you're using. So everything's been rebuilt on that, and it gives us a lot more of, control coverage as well as consistency between the controls. So talk a little bit about that. And then finally, there's a management UI that is now built into PowerShell Universal, which Universal Dashboard takes advantage of. So that means that we can actually manage our dashboards. We can manage the third-party components that you may be using. You can view logs and execute commands inside your Universal Dashboard dashboards directly from this management UI. So there was some semblance of a management UI in Universal Dashboard Enterprise Edition, but now you just kind of get this kind of for free in as part of the Universal platform. So this question has been coming up more and more frequently is what happened to UD Community? So all the features that I'm going to be showing today are primarily just community features. So there is no distinction between PowerShell Universal and PowerShell Universal Community. There's just PowerShell Universal. This is for my own sake and going crazy trying to maintain two separate projects. But you'll be able to run your dashboards for free. You can execute your APIs for free, just like you would with UD Community previously. So PowerShell Universal, you can just stand it up, run it for free. It doesn't require any licensing. Similar to Universal Dashboard Premium Enterprise, if you want the authentication and authorization features, then you have to buy a license. So similar to UD Community, the frameworks and controls are open source. So the platform itself is not, but we've open sourced all the controls. Primarily, that's where we were getting contributions from the community. The platform itself was difficult for people to, I think, kind of grok and understand and make an effective change to. But the frameworks themselves are kind of built on PowerShell and JavaScript, and that's about it. So if you kind of can understand that, you can go ahead and contribute to those frameworks or add your own controls or tweak the controls that are there, that kind of thing. And like I said, it's free to use with the same limitations as before. So that all being said, you pretty much can do all the same things that you could do in UD Community inside PowerShell Universal. Just download it and start playing with it. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing in the demo today. First, we're going to start with an overview of PowerShell Universal and kind of some of the admin console UI stuff, just so you kind of get a feel of what's going on in there. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about configuration. Universal Dashboard had a kind of unique configuration system. If you think about it, it was using pretty much PowerShell scripts to configure a website. We've maintained that in PowerShell Universal. We've made it a little more organized and a little more structured, and I'll show you what that means. Then we're going to talk a little bit about dashboard management. So we're just going to create a dashboard. I'm going to show off some of the features of diagnostic features, as well as building a dashboard and starting and stopping dashboards. Then I'll talk about Material UI, some of the components that we have. I'll show you some of the new components that people have been asking for a really long time, and just kind of give you a demo of those. And that's in terms of standard components. Then I'll talk a little bit about custom components and show you a feature that's coming in 1.3 of PowerShell Universal to actually manage custom components directly inside PowerShell Universal. I'll touch on security and licensing at the end, just to kind of give you an idea of what else is available if you do decide that you wanted to purchase it. But like I said, a lot of this stuff I'm going to be touching on today, you can just kind of play with for free. All right, so I'm just going to jump into a demo. I'll stop for any questions, though, after I went over all that. I don't know if anyone...
Yeah, we're watching.
Yeah,
Okay.
nothing yet.
All right, sounds good.
Go for
All
it.
right.
Full steam ahead.
Sounds good. I'll keep plowing through. All right, so what I'm running here is PowerShell Universal, and it's running as a standalone exe. So I just have downloaded, we have like an MSI that'll run as a service. We have a zip file that you can download that just has the exe in it. You can also run it as a Docker container if you want. And once you have that up and running, you're just gonna have a web server listening on localhost 5000. All these settings are configurable, much like they were in PowerShell Universal Dashboard, the PowerShell module. And then you can just log in. The default username is just admin, and then you can just specify any password to start. And then that's going to load up the admin console. So the admin console itself, it kind of is composed of like the various features that we provide in terms of APIs, automation, and dashboard. So on the first kind of thing here is APIs. This is very similar to new UD endpoint that you used in Universal Dashboard. And what we're kind of providing here is just kind of a visual representation of all those scripts that you saw in Universal Dashboard all the time. And I'll show you how this is kind of laid out in a configuration sense in a little bit. But first we have APIs here. You can define your API endpoints, add new endpoints that have get method, different methods like get, post, delete, that kind of thing. And you can then specify, your new URLs. They can contain variables just like they could in Universal Dashboard. You can process query strings and get bodies and that kind of thing. And then if you actually click view, what's cool is you can actually go out and see the code that is actually executed when this API is executed. So for example, if I wanted to copy this URL, I could pop open a, actually I already have it in my history here.
Yeah, you may want to make your
pop open
make your font a little bit bigger there.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
So I can then do something like invoke web request, and it'll go out and it'll call that API for me, execute that PowerShell script block, and then return that data that I have defined inside that API. So same thing as PowerShell Universal Dashboard v2, but now it's all inside PowerShell Universal, and it just kind of is inside this UI that you can look at. We also have automation. I'm not going to talk too much about this just because it's like a totally different thing besides Universal Dashboard, but the idea here is that you can kind of add your scripts, schedule your scripts, view jobs, that kind of thing. And then you can view output from those jobs, for example, like pipeline output or text output, pipeline output, that kind of thing. So this is like something that's kind of different than Universal Dashboard, and it isn't totally correlated with it, but you can integrate with it really well in Universal Dashboard. And I have some examples on the website of how to do that. But what we're primarily going to be talking about today is all this dashboard stuff. So as you can see here, I have a dashboard section, and I have one dashboard running right now. It is actually running on a base URL of dashboard. So if I actually click this view button, it's going to pop open a new tab. And what you're going to see here is that you can see the URL dashboard is that base URL. So I could have multiple dashboards running inside this universal server at different URLs. And now I've just loaded this empty page, which is my empty v3 dashboard. And what's cool about this is that since I can do multi-dashboard, I can actually configure things such as the framework that I'm running on, the version of PowerShell that I'm running. So if I want to do PowerShell 7 or if I want to do Windows PowerShell, you can actually configure all those settings. I could also turn on and off authentication, that kind of thing. Additionally, the dashboard itself is running independently of the web server. So for example, a lot of problems that people have with Universal Dashboard is, you're integrating with all these PowerShell scripts, you're collecting data, you're running all this stuff, and then occasionally you're, for whatever reason, your dashboard consumes a lot of memory or it crashes, and then your web server is just down. But with PowerShell Universal, it now just runs by itself, independent of that PowerShell process that's actually running all your dashboard code. So if your dashboard does have a problem, you can just go ahead and stop and start that dashboard, and it'll start up a new PowerShell process in the background, which doesn't affect the web server itself. So it'll continue servicing requests, and you can kind of manage it remotely. Inside the info page here, you're going to see a lot of things that you would see in the, I don't even remember what we called it before, in Universal Dashboard 2, but it has things such as a code editor, logs for your dashboard, so you can see which commands are being loaded into the dashboard, which modules it's loaded, that kind of thing. If you've experienced any errors, you'll see them in here. We have a console that gives you the ability to actually execute commands in the run space that your dashboard is running in. So you can see things like, for example, here's a UD execution service, that kind of thing. So anything that might be defined inside your dashboard that you kind of want to debug, you can see that there. And then we have sessions and endpoints that are kind of defined for our particular dashboard. All right. Some new concepts that are kind of new to UDV3 and PowerShell Universal. First are the ability to use multiple frameworks. So one of the problems and kind of the big complaints, I think, the previous version of Universal Dashboard was that whenever you upgraded the new version of Universal Dashboard, it would break your dashboard, and you'd have a lot of problems upgrading, that kind of thing. First of all, we're trying to fix that by using this new control library, so that's a lot more stable. We write a lot less code, and the controls are more consistent, and things won't break as easily. But additionally, now you can have multiple frameworks defined. So you could have a single version of Universal running, and then you could have these multiple versions of Universal Dashboard, and you can kind of select the version. So you could easily test out whether or not the new version works with your dashboard. If you don't want to upgrade to a new version for some reason, you can just continue to use that old version. We also support 2.9 and 3.0 dashboards. So kind of the idea with the 2.9 dashboards is we were trying to get as close as possible to allow users that have existing 2.9 dashboards to actually run them in Universal. So all the commandlets are the same, all the controls are the same. It's actually using that old control library and everything. It supports theming. So there might be some bugs there still, but we're trying to get that to the point where you could actually kind of load up your previous dashboards in Universal without having to upgrade a whole bunch of stuff. Because with the Universal Dashboard v3 commandlets, there's a lot of differences. So you kind of want to start fresh there, or follow our migration doc to kind of get over to v3. Another kind of thing that we're adding kind of into the new version of PowerShell Universal. So one thing I want to note here is I'm running the nightly build of Universal. So we actually have 1.2.8 released right now, but I'm running 1.3. So some of these things I'll tell you when I'm touching on something that's not quite released yet, but you can always play with in a nightly build. So we're going to add kind of the management of dashboard components. So one of the really cool things about Universal Dashboard was a huge community that kind of grew behind it. And one of the awesome things is like all these custom components that people built. So now we have kind of integration to the Universal Dashboard Marketplace. So kind of right inside the Universal experience, you can kind of click around, you can find popular controls or new controls or browse all the controls. And then from there, you can actually click and install them or view more information about them. For example, like you can see this financial chart, that kind of thing. And then if you click install, it'll call save module, store it into a local folder, and then you can use that in your dashboard. So that's pretty neat. And then finally, we're adding support for published folders. So this is kind of the idea that you can share files via your web server. So if you have a particular folder path that you want to kind of just allow people to download files from, this is a concept in Universal Dashboard that we'll be adding in 1.3. All right, so that's kind of an overview of kind of the basics of what is in the PowerShell Universal kind of ecosystem. So the idea being APIs, automation, and dashboard are kind of the three major features. So I want to jump into, or first before I jump into some dashboard code, I want to talk a little bit about what Universal does in terms of configuration. So if we actually go and look inside the repository folder, it will create this in program data. And as you edit things in the UI, it's actually generating PS1 files. So what you'll see in here are various PS1 files that set various configuration options inside PowerShell Universal. So we have things like authentication, those components that you saw in there, frameworks that we saw in there. So similar to the way that Universal Dashboard worked, where you could use a commandlet to do a published folder, we have commandlets for published folders. The difference here is that each kind of feature of Universal Dashboard is kind of in its own PS1 file, and it's kind of organized for you. That said, you can do things like edit these PS1 files, and what Universal is actually going to do is it's watching this whole directory, and as I make changes to these PS1 files, it's actually going to automatically refresh the UI, or well, refresh the Universal kind of web server with the data that you just added to that or to that PS1 file. So, for example, I added an API endpoint, user2 now is showing inside the admin console, and I could actually go ahead and invoke user2, and I would get information back from that endpoint. So you can use the UI to do this stuff, or you can do it via code. So if I delete this, now if we go back to our endpoints PS1 file, you'll see that second endpoint is now deleted. So it kind of uses that same experience as Universal Dashboard of like editing these files, and then it kind of updates the website based on that. And it's looking at all the files in this directory. Right now it's a little I don't know. It kind of like reconfigures the entire server every time you change something. So there's been a discussion that we should probably make that a little bit smarter. So right now, if you make any changes, it's just going to reconfigure everything for you. But in terms of like a production environment, you might not want that because it's going to stop and start all your dashboards and that kind of thing. All right, so the configuration experience is, like I said, similar, and the dashboard files are actually pretty much identical to what you would see inside V2 dashboards. So I have a new UD dashboard, it's got a title, it's got some content, and I could edit it here, or I could edit it in the UI. So I'm actually just going to edit this in the UI, and we're going to go through some of the new controls that are available in Universal Dashboard V3. But first, what I just kind of want to talk about is I'm not going to go through all the controls because there's a bunch of them, and I want to kind of go through the ones that are new and interesting and ones that people have been asking for a long time. But we're using Material UI, and it provides all these controls, and a lot of them are very familiar. You're going to see things like buttons and checkboxes, radios, selects, all that kind of stuff. And those are here. And then we actually, sorry, there's a Zoom thing in my way here. All right. We have documented all the controls that are available in Universal on the docs page. So you can actually see there are examples as well as all the documentation for each one of the controls is available here. So if you want to start playing with it, it's very similar to UDV2, and you can just kind of get examples of all those basic controls. Some of the commandlet names are the same and have very similar parameters to UDV2. All right, but I'm going to show off some of the cool new controls that we have, just because these are things that people have been asking for a long time, and I think it's cool that we were able to implement some of these pretty easily. So first of all, we have a new UD autocomplete. So this is a control that people always wanted in their forms. So the ability to autocomplete forms. And it pretty much creates a text box, and then there's kind of two modes the autocomplete works in. One being like a static list of things that will autocomplete as you type. The other being a dynamic list. So if you have this on-load options script block defined, you can provide a list of options, and you can source that from wherever you'd like. You could source that from SQL Server or Active Directory or whatever. And then you're going to receive some information about what the user is typing, and then you can return those values back to the user. So our Universal Dashboard page will automatically reload. And now you can see it's not really formatted great, but there is a big text box across the top here. And as I type, it's actually going to start auto-completing. And based on what I type, it's going to give me suggestions on that. And yeah, so that could have been sourced anywhere. I just had a static list, but it's actually executing that script block every time I type in there. All right, so another control very related to the autocomplete control is a new form experience. So people familiar with Universal Dashboard v2 have probably used the new UD input. We've actually gotten rid of new UD input in favor of a commandlet called new UD form. So new UD form actually, if I can make this bigger. Maybe.
Yeah, Control++ will help.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, there you go. So new UD form, what it actually allows you to do is create the same experience as you kind of expect with new UD input. User enters some stuff, and then you get that information back from that user, and then you can execute some PowerShell based on that user's input. The difference with new UD form, though, is we've kind of simplified it a little bit in terms of like how you use it, and we've also provided the ability to kind of customize it more extensively. So rather than using new UD input and new UD input field, and then we had this like generic commandlet that new UD input field was, now you just use the same commandlets that you would use elsewhere in your page inside new UD form. So for example, I have this new UD form, and the content for that is just new UD text box. And I can define a bunch of different text boxes or check boxes or select boxes. If you actually look at our documentation, we have a list of all the controls that are supported in new UD form. And as long as they're inside the content, they can actually be nested inside other controls. So you could have, for example, in this case, I have some rows and columns defined. So I can kind of like control the formatting. I could have buttons in here. I could put anything I want inside my form. But all these controls are kind of like aware of the fact that they're in a form. And then when I click the submit button, it's actually going to provide me with this JSON data that I can then process however I want, and then invoke, PowerShell commandlets or update the page, that kind of thing. So we'll save that, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. All right, over here, refresh our page. All right, so here's my form. You can see I have a couple of rows I defined and the columns that I defined. And then from there, I can just kind of go ahead and type some stuff in my form and click submit. And you can see here that it's returned that JSON via a toast message. And we could process that however we'd like. So I just decided to show it in a toast, but you could, create a user account or, start a certain sub-service, something like that with this. So. And as you can see, like it has no like default formatting. It's not put in a card or anything like that. So you can kind of like adjust the look and feel of your dashboard page a little more than you could with UDV2, where everything was inside a card and that kind of thing. So UD form supports validation, just like new UD input did. The only thing it doesn't support right now is auto-generated forms, where you kind of specify a param block. I'm not really sure if we're going to add that or not. We kind of support that in universal automation right now. So we'll see. We'll see if people want it. But having the ability to kind of just easily define your form might kind of alleviate the need for someone to actually do the param block thing. So that is an example of our new UD form. All right. Another control that people have asked for, I don't know, this is probably one of the first controls people asked for when they started using Universal Dashboard, was, it's a little hard to see on my end, was a wizard control. So a wizard control being a control that you step through the wizard, and then it has various steps, and based on the previous step, you may adapt the second step based on that, and then kind of you have a finish sequence. So we have new UD stepper. So fortunately for us, the material UI library has a stepper control. And all we need to do here is define a new UD stepper and then define some steps. You can give a label to the step. And then every time the step loads, what you're going to get is the ability to return the content of that step. So in this case, I am returning a tag that just has like the title step 1, and then a text box that has the ID for text step 1. And then similar to the form, any one of the form controls that you use, so all the ones that The form supports, the stepper also supports. So if you have checkboxes or checkboxes or selects, that kind of thing, you're going to get information about what the user entered as the step progresses. So when we get to our second step here, you're going to see that I am again using the body variable. This predefined variable is going to have the JSON value of the previous step, or like the context of the entire stepper pretty much. So as I step through, that body will be updated with more information as the user steps through it. And this onload script block is executed dynamically, so you can kind of adjust that step based on the previous step's input. So if I wanted to, for example, show or hide controls based on that, I could. So there are some additional things we want to add to this stepper. Right now it's pretty basic, but I'd love to have some, or it looks like we're going to add validation for 1.3 per step. So then you could actually validate whether or not someone can move to the next step. But there's a lot of other things we could do with a stepper in terms of allowing people to jump around in the steps or not go back, that kind of thing. So we have a basic implementation here though, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we've removed all the controls outside of cards, so that's why you can see that we have this nice flat experience. But you could put it in a card if you wanted to. But this is kind of what the stepper looks like. You can see I just have this kind of unformatted text box. I can make it look a little nicer, and then we just have these next and back buttons. But if I were to type in this text box and click next, you'll see that when I get to the second step, now I have context from that previous step. So I could have shown a different control. I could, potentially, have created something on that previous step, that kind of thing. And then as I step through, you'll see that now my step 2 text box has some information. And then finally, my step 3 text box has some information. So as it finishes, you kind of have the opportunity to return some text to the screen. And in this case, I just, return pretty much the value of the context of that stepper. So that's kind of the idea with the stepper, is that we have a form that kind of can adapt as you move through the steps. So very similar to the form control, but in the stepping experience, I guess. All right, so the last standard control I want to talk about in this presentation is our new table control. So people use tables a lot, tables and grids. So one thing that we've done in UDV3 is we've actually merged table and grid. So there is no more UD grid, UD table. There's just UD table. UD table has all the features of UD grid pretty much. So that's it's a little confusing, I know, but the table is kind of the name that they use in Material UI. So we're trying to stay consistent with that. So our table control, you can either kind of go very basic with it, or you can go very complicated with it. The most basic parameter set, you can just use this data parameter and pass in some data, and it'll show a table of data for you. But if you want to get a little funky with it, you can actually go ahead and customize the columns. So one of the problems with the previous version of UD Grid is you would have, if you wanted buttons or any controls inside your table, kind of the method that you would do that is you'd actually modify your data. So you would say, my protein property or whatever now has a UD button in it. And that works fine. It would put the button in there, but what it would do is it would break everything else associated with the table. You couldn't sort on that column. You couldn't search on that column because it didn't know what the data was. It just thought it was a UD component. With the new version of UD table, we now have this ability to specify UD table columns, and it'll select the properties and the title of the column, and then it also has this optional render method. And what that'll do is it'll actually call that when it wants to render this column, and then you get the entire information about kind of that particular row, and then you can render that column however you see fit. So in this case, I'm going to actually render a button for this table. So let's actually see how this looks. So kind of so one thing I know people are going to complain about immediately with our new version of UD table is it uses too much white space, and there are settings for this that allow it to kind of stylized, like kind of a squished table. Right now we're using the default one, which like is very big, like it can hardly fit 5 rows on the table, on the screen. But it has all the features of kind of UD grid. You can export the data. You can choose how many rows you want to show, and then you can page through the data. It also supports server-side paging, or processing is what we call it, and that allows you to, populate the table data via like something like a SQL server, and you could actually page inside SQL rather than returning all the data from SQL and trying to show it in the table.
That's cool.
So,
Adam, we've got
yeah.
some questions.
Yeah, sure.
Give you a breath.
Yeah.
So one of the folks in Twitch asked, will it be possible to customize the submit button like it was in V2 and in V3? So instead of saying save, but maybe next, or providing some custom text in those buttons.
If it's not there already, we'll add it, because it's one of the features that we should add. It might be there already. I'd have to look. But yes, it will.
And I was actually thinking of this, and one of the commenters asked, can we implement session persistence inside a step? So if a person doesn't complete their stepper, that they can go back and complete that step.
Right now, it is not implemented. There is not a current step property, but that'd be pretty easy to add, and then you could use session variables to do so. So I'm going to take some notes.
That's what we call community improvement.
Yeah, right. So submit button, text, and session state for stepper. Okay, yeah.
And the next one, same submitter. What's the difference between a UD card and UD paper?
I will, that's a very good question. The card is like very customizable. The paper is a little more simple. I don't know if we necessarily needed 2 components for that. Material UI has 2 different components for it. That's mostly why we implemented it that way. But the card and paper, very similar. If you actually look at the material documentation in terms of cards and paper, let's see if I can, surfaces, I think. So paper is like super simple, and it pretty much has like 2 properties on it: the elevation and then the variant. While if you look at a card, you can get really, really crazy with the cards. So like here's like an example.
The deep end.
Going crazy with the card. So I would argue that we maybe didn't need to do paper and card because they look very similar, but I'd say the paper is just kind of gives you that effect of like floating, and then the card has some really complex things that we can do. So this isn't 100% implemented yet, where you could like build a card that is this complex, but it's pretty close. So we actually have commandlets for modifying things like the card headers and the card media and content and stuff like that. I'd say it's less that it's not implemented and more that it's not documented and tested really well. So that's one of the things we're kind of trying to iron out before the GA release.
One more, and I'll let you get back on stride because I'm honestly really interested in this. Is using a scheduled endpoint still the best way to prefetch large data sets to make sure things stay responsive and snappy? Basically cheat before you show it?
Yes, so you can still use scheduled endpoints, and you just pretty much what you do is you define them inside here, and you can more or less do not editing. More or less do something like new UD endpoint, then pass the schedule, and you don't have to like pass the result to anything. It'll just pick that up and it'll start running that schedule in the background. So that does work, and you can store it in the cache variable. The other thing that I've been doing with dashboards is if you do have the automation stuff can be scheduled, and then we actually persist the pipeline output. I don't know why my box is so slow. Eventually it's loaded. We persist the pipeline output as CLI XML. So this actually has all the properties of whatever you may want to cache, more or less. And it's persistent. So unlike the cache variable, if the service restarts or whatever, you still have this information. And then you could retrieve that information and put it into your universal dashboard. So I have some examples of that I just did recently around this Active Directory dashboard I'm building. That said, this will be a little bit slower than accessing the cache. So if you just need something that's like super fast that you want to kind of persist that data, use the cache in Universal Dashboard. And if you don't care if when the dashboard bounces, that data is gone, that would probably still be the best bet.
Okay.
All right. So let's see. I was playing with this table.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, the one thing I was talking about was this render method. It has rendered this button, and when I click this button, you can see that it pops up the name of the dessert that I was. But it is pretty much underneath this button. What's cool though about this is because it's using this render method, but it also knows about the actual data that this column pertains to. We still support things like sorting on this table as well as filtering. So unlike before, if you actually had this like button or whatever, that would like break sorting, that would break filtering and all that kind of thing. But now since we kind of persist that and the table itself knows about the data, it can actually maintain that. And then you can also get the rendering of the button execution. So that's kind of why we changed the way that works, but it should be a lot more flexible and a little less error prone, I think, in terms of like trying to shove UD components in there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Most
I think
important question: what's the dessert that's only 1 calorie? I'm kind of curious.
It's a good question. Frozen yogurt.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I think this is actually examples from the Material UI page itself. Yeah, so this table, I think there's some things we can do to improve it still. Like I said, like the styling doesn't look great. And I think there's some additional features around like exporting. I know people wanted to be able to customize that export experience, that kind of thing. So some of that stuff is not quite implemented yet, but I'm kind of looking for feedback on what we do have so far, and then we'll kind of continue to improve from there. One last thing that I didn't touch on that I want to before we jump over to custom components, and I'll try to hurry up a little bit, is we have a new theming engine. This actually just uses the Material UI theme engine, so it has its own theme engine built in. Kind of the idea here is we define a hash table, and then similar to kind of the previous version of Universal Dashboard, you define a hash table, it sets some colors and then that kind of thing. The difference here is that you're not styling individual controls with CSS and you have these like crazy themes that break every time we update something. We're actually just using the Material UI theme engine. So if we were to go over to, let's see if I can find this really quick. This page here on the Material UI site, you can see they have an example theme. So you can effectively translate this into a hash table and then modify whatever you want. So for example, if you wanted to like change the breakpoint, so it would like adjust the style or the sizing of the page, or if you wanted to change the different palette colors, that kind of thing, all you'd have to do is do something similar to what I'm doing here, where I'm changing the primary palette color from this bluish color to closer to black, and then saving it, and eventually we can go, oh, there we go. Refresh that, and what you're going to see is the top bar here now changes to that color that I selected. So I didn't have to like figure out CSS and like dig around in the web tools or anything like that. I can just use the Material UI theming kind of functionality that's built in. There is the ability to specify a primary and secondary theme, and that's kind of what this little, I can probably not see me clicking on it. There's a theme switcher that Universal or Material UI provides, so you could have a light and dark theme potentially. And you can actually see that there are settings for that. There's like the primary palette as well as a light and dark palette that you could specify. So that's kind of how the theming works. And since all the controls come from Material UI, you're going to have the advantage of like those are built around that theme engine. So they're just going to kind of adapt based on that. We're still looking at implementing some way to do CSS though, because I think people still are going to want to use that, but that is currently not implemented in V3 right now. It does work in V2 though. So we have the V2 framework that's still available in here, and your custom themes will still work in here. So that's been all implemented. All right, so I think we have 9 minutes left, right?
Yeah.
All right,
something like that.
The last thing I want to touch on then real quickly here then is components, because like I said before, that's like a huge part of the ecosystem is like people have built all these cool custom components, and then you can now install them via the marketplace, and then it's just a PowerShell module, kind of cool. So what I want to show is like currently what we have to do with Universal 1.2 is if you want to use custom components, you just need to import them, kind of like you probably were previously in Universal Dashboard. So I'm just importing them from our default installation location for these components. We install the charts and map component. Those are used to be like premium enterprise features, but now we're just kind of giving away for free with PowerShell Universal. And I have this UD confetti pretty much PowerShell module installed that is a custom component as well. And once I import those components, what's cool is we have actually made it so that all the custom components that you used in V2 will just work in V3. So if I were to actually go in here, so UD confetti, like I have not modified it at all. I got that from the PowerShell gallery, like right before this presentation. And then UD map and Nevo chart are the ones that are included with the actual Universal Dashboard kind of installation when you install it. All right, so that updates, we refresh the page. And if I didn't break anything, you'll see that we have confetti coming at the top, and we have our map that is loaded here, and we have our kind of Nevo chart down here. So all those components were kind of loaded dynamically. They were just PowerShell modules that I installed from the PowerShell gallery. We're going to have a little bit better experience, hopefully, in 1.3, where you don't have to import these. You'll be able to like assign the components that you want available in your dashboard, and then it'll automatically import those modules for you. So yeah, so you can go ahead and just like grab things from the marketplace that you want to use in your V3 dashboards, and they will still work. So we try to take care in making sure that that API didn't break, so that all the existing components just kind of work in V3.
And Adam, this is where people would contribute from the community of like where you would go and find functions and features that you wanted to add, or maybe you felt a need. That's where you would put it.
So yeah, if you want to create your own component, yes, you can do it that way. Okay. And I still need to like update the documentation for oh man, I edited this readme and put some exclamation points in there. I need to update the documentation kind of for V3 and building custom components. We're going to try to make that easier. One of the things is with Universal Dashboard, all the components that are built in the code is actually up here on GitHub. So if you did want to just tweak a component, all the components are actually here. But yeah, if you wanted to build your own component, you can check out the marketplace, the Universal Dashboard Marketplace, and this has some information on how to submit a module to the PowerShell gallery that will show up in the marketplace, and then that will also show up inside PowerShell Universal. So if you do build a component, yeah, just follow this information, and then it will allow other people to kind of use that component inside their dashboards.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's see. Yeah, like I said, most of what I showed today is like free, available. The things that you need to license, the automation only runs 25 jobs a day if it's unlicensed. APIs you can't turn on authentication, and same with dashboards, you won't be able to turn on authentication. Published folders now support authentication, but if you don't have a license for dashboard, you won't be able to turn that on. So yeah, so you get a lot for free, and you can definitely go ahead and start playing around and build a lot of the same stuff that you could build in UD Community right in PowerShell Universal. Yeah, so I guess we have 4 minutes. I don't know if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I can kind of...
I'll skim the cream.
All right.
So folks asked, if you have an update on one set of pages, and I don't know if that means a separate dashboard, can that be reflected in another dashboard running on the same server? Basically updating in one location, maybe related to user permissions showing up in another dashboard.
It kind of depends. Like the dashboards themselves maintain their own session state, and cache state right now. So it's likely something that we will centralize or figure out how to create a distributed cache, that kind of thing. So if you're updating a cache in one dashboard, you want it to be reflected in another dashboard, that will currently not happen. You'll have to update that cache in both dashboards. So I'd say the dashboards themselves are kind of isolated. Technically, if someone is logged in, you're logged into the universal server, not the dashboard itself. So if you authenticate, you can access either dashboard. We're going to be adding some role-based access controls to that, so you could have like an admin dashboard and I don't know, a IT dashboard or something.
Right.
But right now, it's pretty much if you authenticate and have access to those dashboards, you'll be able to access either one. You do have access to a roles variable. So one of the authentication things that we provide is the ability to do role-based access, which is kind of a combination of our claims policy and role-based access for universal dashboard. And I could do a whole nother session on some of that stuff, but that information is available inside the dashboard, so you can actually modify the dashboard based on what roles a particular user is a part of. So we have some documentation on how to do that.
That's awesome. A couple of people had questions related to paywall or shopping cart components in Universal Dashboard. I think we're all wanting to build our own web apps.
Let's see, paywall and shopping cart. I mean, you could, you could potentially build a paywall stuff. You could have two dashboards, one dashboard being unauthenticated and one being authenticated. The unauthenticated one would be where you kind of sign up for your paywalled application, and then the authenticated dashboard being where users that have like authenticated would access. So that is possible. A shopping cart, you'd likely need some sort of custom component to do that. You might be able to do it with like buttons and some of the components that we have built in, and then using like session variables and stuff like that. It might be a little bit of work though, but it's definitely possible.
Sounds like something that someone could communicate and commit via the community to the marketplace.
Yeah,
the rest
right,
of us.
totally. Yeah. So yeah, definitely possible, but yeah, it might be better as a React control rather than trying to string together a bunch of UD controls.
Okay. I think we're almost a touchdown.
Yeah, I think
All right.
there are a few other questions, but I think some other people beat you to them.
Okay, cool. One thing I want to note is for anyone that's a Universal Dashboard like customer already and they have a Universal Dashboard license, you can just upgrade to this and your license will still work in here. So we didn't like just say like nobody can use Universal PowerShell Universal anymore. Screw all you guys. So if you already have a license, you can do all this stuff. So just note that.
All right, well, awesome. We appreciate you taking the time to come and show us all this. I think it was about 30 or so people here, so it was great. Learned a lot.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, it was fun. It was the first time I showed all that off, so it was, I'm glad it didn't completely break.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, the demo gods were good to you today. I can't do that. Every time I try to do a live demo, it's like, done. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah, right. Been there.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all the time we have this week. So in 2 weeks from now, which I think is July 21st, we have our next guest. We have Don Jones going to be with us for Shell of an Idea, Ask Me Anything. You can find the form on PowerShell.org/PSPowerHour. You click on episode 5, Shell of an Idea, AMA. There's a contact form down at the bottom of that. So you can send us an email with your questions, or you can put them on Twitter just using the hashtag Shell of an Idea. And we'll get all of those and send them over to Don beforehand so he can create some crafty answers, and also keep some so that we can try to stump him live, which is not going to happen, but we can try at least. All right, well, other than that, guys, appreciate your time, and for those of you that are watching online, I guess we'll see you on the 21st.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Really appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for being there.
Thanks, Adam.
Yep, bye.